68. Today, the period we're going to cover is 1967 through 1972, which is essentially all the Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia operations. So, before we get the VIPs up on stage, I got to tell you, when I first sent out the message for this concept and idea, I coordinated with Mr. Brown over there at the history office. We all thought it was a really good idea with the first South history office, and I says, I want to call it Gunship Gray. And he says, wow, yeah, that's really a good idea, because the gunships are painted gray, and that's the color that we always call our gunships. The J model, the U model, the H model were all painted gunship gray. So I called up and I talked to Chief Mansell here, and I said, hey, Dick, yeah, we're going to have this Gunship Gray event. He goes, I'd really love to participate, but you know, when I flew the gunships, they were painted black. I said, yes, Dick, I know that, but this is more about your hair and less about the paint job. So that's where it is. The senior citizen gunship, which I'm part of that, I guess, we'll say. So let's get our VIPs up on stage, please. Escorts.
No railings here.
Yeah, sure. It's almost like loading 20mm back in the day. Now, we talk a lot nowadays, those that are in the units right now know, innovation seems to be the key word these days. Adapting to the mission, adapting to the demands of the mission, innovation is a really big concept nowadays. And I can tell you, these men sitting here to my right are probably the most innovative of all the innovators in the gunship world, because they're the ones that actually started it all. As a matter of fact, one of them here today, who will identify himself in a little bit here, was on the original development program in 1967 that built the very first gunship. So, we'll start off with introductions, and they'll introduce themselves along with when they began the program and what their crew position was. Let's start off with Master Sergeant Davis. Microphone's right there. You don't have to pick it up. You don't have to pick it up, Bob.
You start with me?
Yep. Start with you.
First, thank all of you for being here, and thank you for your service. I'm Bob Davis, and I started on this program in April 1967. Flew out to California, got sick too sick, which you call sign is 626, but the airplane was involved in 3 major accidents, so we called it sick too sick. That was our gunship. That's why they gave it to us, because it was a piece of junk. But anyway, it turned out to be a beautiful piece of equipment. But anyway, we configured the airplane, brought it down here for testing, took it back to right back, took it overseas, and did it for 9 months back. So right now, you've got where I started. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to add, too, that where Master Sergeant Davis tested the guns on Eglin, Ramp 22, is the exact same spot where we tested the guns for the Whiskey and the J. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Next is Lieutenant Colonel Renault. Sir?
My name is, thanks for coming, guys. My name is Bob Renault. I was in the very first original U-bomb. We had the one airplane, 626. We had 6 pilots, including our squadron commander and ops officer, and 4 of the rest of us, all the way down. 2 majors and 2 captains. And Spectre call signs, we had our own personal call signs. I was Spectre 07 because I was the junior most pilot, but I had to watch C-130 flying hours, so I was made an instructor. And so we carried that through our particular period. And John, I don't think you carried the personal call signs after that, did you? No, they didn't have that after that. But anyway, we also had additional duties. I was a maintenance officer and in charge of the gunners, if there's such a thing as being in charge of a gunner. We had 4 navigators. We flew every night, sometimes 2 to 3 missions every night. And we usually carried just 2 pilots, but the ops officer and the squadron commander would fly with us as a 3rd pilot. And that was very handy because we could relieve the nod operator, who we didn't have the electronic seats that goes up and down, so fully clothed with all armor and flak vests and so forth. Knee pins get pretty tough on a 4-hour flight, so we would relieve the nod operator on that basis. I guess I was 68, 62, 69, April 68 to April 69. I think that's about all they need to know about me.
Yes, sir. Well, believe me, we'll get a little deeper into it here in a bit. Next is Lieutenant Colonel John Cahoon. There's a microphone right there.
I arrived at Ubon, and what probably was my most memorable occasion that I was there. We arrived on Christmas Eve at sunset. The sun was going down, beautiful sunset, and Colonel Renault and some of his people who were already there met us with a state body truck to pick up our baggage. We were about 6 of us traveling together. On that state body truck, they had a banner down the side, and it said, if I had a year to do at Ubon, I would. If you want to know the rest of it, check me after. Okay. But anyway, we arrived. We had 3 crews. We became part of the cadre. We were first class in the gunships. We started at Lockburn Air Force Base. Went through the training there, and ended up at Ubon.
All right, thank you, sir. Next is Senior Master Sergeant Bill Patterson. Yeah, just there you go. Just here you go.
Okay. I'm Senior Master Sergeant Bill Patterson, and my first interest in the gunships showed up in 1969. And at the time I was stationed at CCK. We go TDY to Cameron Bay. Well, Cameron Bay had an outside theater. And that afternoon, we were lucky enough to be on. You sat there and watched the movies. And, there was north of us was a mountain that separated us from another base at that time in Vietnam. But just about down around sundown, all of a sudden you'd see these massive amounts of tracers pouring out of the sky, about even mountain coming down. And I was sitting there and I asked one of the crew chiefs, I said, what is that? He said, oh, that's either an AC-119 gunship or UAC-130s over there helping the Koreans and Castle Mountain. I said, my God, I've never seen so many tracers coming down at one time, you know. He said, yeah. He said, you should see the guns on that A-model gunship, you know. And I think at probably the time I left there, the 40s had been placed on the A-model. Well, I got signed to Travis. I'm sitting in the SAC alert area, and this tech sergeant comes up to me and he said, Bill, you got a lot of A-model time. He said, you went to flight engineer school, you did all that crew chief school. I said, yeah. He says, well, why don't you go and put your paperwork in to go be a illuminator operator on a gunship? I said, well, what's a illuminator operator? He says, well, using blind bat, you're kicking flares out and everything, but he said the main thing is always bring the airplane back in one piece. I said, oh, okay. So I went up and filled out my paperwork. It took about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, bam. I had a school date, April of 1971 at Lockwood. And from there, I went to Ubon and everything, and things got very interesting, very quick. But I was never had any doubt that I did the right thing.
Thank you, sir. Next is Chief Master Sergeant Dick Vansel, Gunner.
Good afternoon, I'm Richard Vansel. Dick to Bill. Anyway,
Of course.
anyway, I was a full-time gunner from 1970 to 1972. Volunteered with a couple of friends from Bergstrom, Texas. We were on Rickies, RF-4Cs. I'm a weapons guy by trade, aircraft weapons guy, 4.62, 2W1. Anyway, got to Ubon. I was one of 19 gunners. There was 19 gunners there when I got there. And there was over 300 when I left. So it just built up, exponentially. Some things about myself and the crew, and I flew with Don Boudreau, was my crew chief, was my lead gun, and Colonel Schmidt was my AC. And Colonel Schmidt was very stickler for the rules. He didn't duel with guns. He didn't stay in the sight beyond certain points. He was very careful. We never got any battle damage while I was over there. Spent a year and something in the country. No BDA whatsoever, so very proud of that fact. I guess that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Next is Lieutenant Colonel Bertie Frakes, which a lot of us will know who he is because he's been around for a long time.
Up here. I got into gunships in 1972. I was coming off an assignment to Guam where I was flying Typhoon chasing in Western Pacific, and I found out I'm getting a consecutive overseas tour, so I'm going to go to AC-130s. That brought me back to Herbert Field at about June and July is when I started my training here at Herbert Field. At that time, I was assigned to the E model version of the gunship. Still there. The E model was configured with 220s and 240s at the time. So that's where I went through in the training here. At the middle of August, we got our crew, got our check ride, and then we went forward to overseas. And I arrived on station in Ubon in September of 72. So my tour over there was toward the last of the Vietnam era gunships mission over there. They did stick around. I came back in June of 73. Came here at Herbert as an instructor in the 415 Special Operations Training Squadron, and stayed around until they brought the aircraft back in 76, I believe, and then they stayed on for another 3 years. And I had my one assignment away from gunships. We went to Little Rock and was still squadron up there, and then came back down here to Duke Field as the Air Force advisor to the reserve unit, and got to fly the A models at that time. Then I just PCA'd back down here to Herbert Field after that, and finished out my career in 1992. But the thing that I found in my time at Ubon was we were in that transition period where we were getting more updated gunnery on the aircraft. In that fact, we had the Trainable 105 was installed in that fall, and I was able to make good use of that in December when we were working the trail. And maybe I'll hear that story about that later. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
All right. Thank you, sir. Now, I'd also like to acknowledge three other individuals from this time span in the room. They won't be up on stage, but they will be available to answer questions afterwards. And it's Worm, Bill, and Three Fingers. I'll let you guys figure out their names afterwards and why they're called that. They're in the front row. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. All right. Now I want to put on that Stewie Griffin time machine and go all the way back to 1967 when the gunship program started, believe it or not, on 1 April. No fooling. 1 April is when the gunship program started, Gunship 2. Now, people ask me all the time, why Gunship 2 and where does that come in? Why wasn't it an AC-130? Because it was experimental aircraft at the time. As Master Sergeant Davis pointed out, that's what they had to work with. And I found out later on, when I talked to Colonel Renault, that airplane had been in 3 major wrecks before it was converted to a gunship. And he says, I'm sure glad I found out about that later than former. So, basically, 1967, everybody's seen this iconic photograph that's up on the board right now of the original development team. And I'll tell you, that guy right there, that's Master Sergeant Davis right there. So, I've heard all kinds of stories about what's with the cane. Were you guys blind? What is this? What did you need help back then? What is with the cane? So we talked about it a lot, and there's some wild stories on the internet about, sniper attacks and all that stuff. Well, unless they were in Ohio, I don't really tend to buy into that. So, Master Sergeant Davis, could you clarify for the record why the canes were in this photograph, please?
Well, the canes came about whenever our project pilot engineer Ron Terry was cutting grass at his home at Andrews Air Force Base, and he ran the lawnmower over his foot. So therefore, he did not have a boot. He was DNIF, he couldn't fly. The project come close to folding, really, because he could not do his leadership capacity. And so we got a cane for him. And then everybody got a cane. So anyway, the canes came about because of his injury. Now they're light in color in that photo. But when we got down here to Eglin for the testing, we fixed that, we camouflaged all them canes. So we painted them all. As a matter of fact, the guy who did the camouflaging of the canes was a gunner from Pearl. When we came down here for the flight testing, we did not have gunners. We called over here and we got 2. Paul Gillum and Terrence Kenny out of the gun shop. They became our gunners and went with us through the whole program. So anyway, that's how the canes came about. No, there was no bounty on Ron Terry's head by the VETCOM, the DC, or the North Vietnamese or anything. It's because of him running the lawnmower over his foot. Sorry, not used to this. So anyway, that's how it came into effect.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, the bounty on Colonel Terry's head always kind of got me. It was seemed kind of far fetched, and as you said, it was far fetched. So, of course, they were successful in their developmental tests. A lot of the tests were done right here in Eglin, and the live fire test on the water range over the Gulf of Mexico. So the next step was combat evaluations in Vietnam. In the fall of 1967, they deployed to Vietnam, South Vietnam, and they essentially went on different mission profiles to prove the concept. You remember, they already had some kind of concept with the AC-47, which preceded it. By the way, it's a good time to mention that AC-47 was Gunship 1, AC-130 was Gunship 2, Gunship 3 was the 119. People tend to get that turned around sometimes and think that 119 came before the 130, when actually it didn't. It came afterward because the Air Force just wouldn't let go that many 130s as to what they needed. So, combat evals. Now, what's interesting in this picture is that that is the actual ASD, or the Aeronautical Systems Division crew at the end of their evaluation in Vietnam. And the picture there to your right is actually a genuine picture of aircraft 626, or as Bob says, 626, and in its configuration. Notice it looks quite a lot different. It's missing a radome. That's true. The first gunship did not have a radome. A different sort of radar, I'll put it that way. They didn't have the standard C-130 radome. But that is it. Configuration. Which brings me to the next slide. As previously mentioned, the AC-130, first model, they called it the Plain Jane. Wow, that's kind of an interesting name, but that's what they named it. It was plain, it was simple, it was do the mission, and from the time they cut the first metal until the airplane deployed was less than 9 months. It's pretty amazing nowadays when you think about we would still be in contract negotiations in that time, if we're even close to being done. So the configuration, you can see 4 20mm guns, 4 7.62mm guns. And what's surprising too is ammunition loads. They took 6,000 rounds of 20 typically. They could take more, but they took over 21,000 rounds of 7.62 on these missions. So the 7.62s were intended to be fired at 3,500 feet AGL. Much like the AC-47s, and the AC-1 or the 20 millimeters were 55. That was their standard altitudes. Standard crew positions on the aircraft. There were 2 pilots, and like Colonel Renault said, sometimes 3. That right there is Colonel Cahoon right there, and young stud at the time, right, John? He says younger, yes, very well, very good. Actually, he was joking with me last night saying, you could have called it Gunship Bald or Gunship Bald Eagle, but I won't say that. It was Gunship Gray.
You wouldn't change.
And we had the navigator right here, the table nav they call it. This was the NOD operator. The night observation device was nothing more than a starlight scope, basically a Generation 1 intensifier. And that was also a nav position that stood in the open doorway, slinging this around like a gun, looking for targets. It was not a comfortable environment for the NOD at all. Then you had the IR operator right here, which actually was the only sensor in the booth at the time. And there's a depiction of the IO, although the ramp would normally be up. In this particular case, it's down, but that's what Senior Master Sergeant Patterson did right there, hanging out the back of the airplane, deploying flares and watching for threats. And of course, the gunners up here, which we call shovel qualified, that's what we did. We shoveled the brass, we kept the guns running. The very last thing is combat photographer. This is before they had actual BDA recorders on the aircraft. They actually sent up a combat photographer from a different squadron on most missions to actually shoot BDA on 16mm film. No kidding. That's where it all started. Now we look at our video recording systems now, they're state-of-the-art. Back then, that was state-of-the-art, believe it or not. All right. Where they went in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, there was a whole lot of activity there next to on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So they were located at Ubon, Thailand, at Royal Thai Air Base, and it was in close proximity to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. There you can see a classic gunship crew, and I have to identify that guy right there. That's Lieutenant Colonel Renault when he was young. Now, or younger, right? All right. That is when the original, that picture was actually taken in late '69, and that's the first, one of the first productions. That was 630. That's in the Air Force Museum right now. Now they call them Moore's decals. And this is gunship training that some of these gentlemen had already mentioned this to begin with. What level of training they got up at Lockbourne? Hurlburt Field was really not a training base at the time. It was an air commando base. So they set up gunship training at Lockbourne, Ohio, near Columbus. Now I'd like to ask Colonel Cahoon if he would identify or let us know just how extensive that training was before he deployed to Uban. Sir?
I think it can be summed up in 2 words, not much. The way I came into the program, I was coming off of a hardship tour, 4 years in Hawaii, and I'd heard about this new weapon system, and I thought, that sounds good. I'm going to go to Southeast Asia one way or another. Let it be on my terms. And luckily, I had a good contact in the Pentagon, and so I called him and I said, I want to get into this new 130 gunship. He said, well, John, you got to have 2,000 hours in 130 time. You got to be current in the A model. I said, well, I got about 4,000 in the A, but I'm not current. He said, well, I can't do it. I said, if I get current, can I have the assignment? He said, sure. I wrangled a TDY to Edwards because they had an A model. I go over and shoot 3 touch-and-go landings and a full stop. They signed me off as current, and I call the Pentagon, and he says, you got the assignment. So I head for Lockbourne, stopping en route at Fairchild for survival training, which was a lot of fun. Got to Uban, I got to Lockbourne and found out the school was supposed to be started about 1 September. And for some reason it got delayed. By the time they started, it was about the 2nd or 3rd week of October. And I don't recall a lot of details. We had a little bit of classroom work, a few days of that, and we started flying. Well, our gunnery range was up on Lake Erie. It's getting into mid-November. We've already had a snow. The guns are coming back iced up. We've got snow and ice on the airplane, and obviously we can't continue flying on Lake Erie. So they packed up the whole school, which consisted of 3 air crews, brought them down here, and we finished up down here at Hurlburt. And that was about 2 or 3 days before Thanksgiving. I don't remember how many flights we had, probably 5 or 6 maybe, and that was it. And we were off and running. We didn't have to learn anything about the 130 because we were all qualified. We all had at least 2,000 hours. But we had to learn the gunship aspect of it. But our learning curve really changed because we knew just enough to get us in trouble, I guess, at that time. When we got to Uban, that's when the learning really started. And thanks to Colonel Renault and the people who were already there, they had laid the groundwork for us, and we just built on that. But basically, we were in the program through and out and qualified in a matter of a month and a half or so. And from what I hear, it takes a little bit longer now to get a gunship pilot qualified. That's the way we did it then.
Thank you, sir. So after training, crews were sent over to Uban, and remember, from almost all of 68, from February of 1968, when Gunship 2 was sent back, they discovered during the combat trials, I guess I'll back up a little bit there, during combat trials that this is a very effective aircraft. And so once it got back, and when Master Sergeant Davis and his guys brought the airplane back, they reworked it and sent it back to Uban. That's when Colonel Renault and the first 6 pilots and the initial crews went over to set up operations. From February of 68 until November, Gunship 2 was the only gunship in the entire theater. This is why they're building the other 4 initial aircraft. So that was really kind of a neat thing as far as when it went to the 6 or 7 different call signs, that the opposing force may have thought that there were 7 different airplanes, and actually, in fact, there was only 1. The fact that they flew it every night was phenomenal. They had a lot of missions, typical AC-47 missions, working in defense of special forces camps, but the Nixon administration had switched what their tactics are. They stopped bombing the north, and they were getting ready to start in late '68 this program called Commando Hunt, and that was to shut off or interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It just so happened that nighttime movements on the trail were what the North Vietnamese were using to mask their presence, because they were able to evade or avoid interdiction from fast movers, jets and bombers and so forth, that typically operated in the daytime. Gunship was a truly unique nighttime platform at the time, and it put it to work real hard. You'll see in the pictures up there, the terrain of Laos is very, very hilly, mountainous jungle. So the North Vietnamese had to go what they call the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is a series of trails mostly through Laos and Cambodia to the south. So the gunship found their mission very quickly was interdiction on the trail. And you can see on the lower left picture there of the ZIL-157, that was a primary target, but they pretty much would shoot anything that was rolling on the trail. There was two different seasons, what they call the dry season and the rainy season. Gunships are very active in the dry season when traffic was moving. Not a lot moved in the rainy season. Sometimes they use that as downtime to update the gunships from year to year. All right. Oh, just went over it. All right. Next thing is I want to talk about close air support in our classic gunship mission that occurred with Colonel Renault's mission to Tinh Yon, Vietnam in September of 1968. Sir, could you explain what happened that night?
When the rainy season moved in, we had to move the bird out. I took down to Saigon. And on the trails, we never used this 6.2 guns because you didn't want tracers identifying where you were, because the guns got pretty damn sharp up there. So we moved down to Saigon and we dropped our altitude at 3,500 where we could use the tracers. And tracers have quite a psychological effect on the enemy. And they didn't have, we had air superiority, so they had nothing, for the most part, airborne. So we were able to roam pretty freely. The Tinh Yon mission was the third mission that night of 626. First mission, Tom Spar was in the left seat and I was in the right seat. And we had pretty much used our ammo up before we got a call for Tinh Yon. And things were pretty quiet at Tinh Yon, but they said they were expecting a big invasion. And so we were running short of fuel, so we decided to go back to Saigon and refuel and rearm. In the meantime, the weather moved in. Well, on the way home, on the way back to Saigon, we lost a DC generator. So when we landed, our few maintenance people had come out from the hotel. The hotel, by the way, had been overrun 3 times by the Vietnamese, Viet Cong. Roof. Yeah. But anyway, the engineer and I changed the DC generator. The rest of the crew helped the maintenance people rearmed, reloaded, and refueled. And back in those days, we had to refuel over the wing. The single point refueling was not used. In fact, it was not tape shut, but completely closed with a plexiglass over it. Because the fuel that was gathered in that vertical supply line was very dangerous if we got a hit anywhere near that. But anyway, we got it refueled and rearmed and turned it around, and now I was in the left seat. And now we were Spectre 07. He explained why we changed the call signs and so forth. All of our pilots, our first 6 pilots, were fully aircraft commander qualified, so that was pretty easy. Then we had to find our way back through the thunderstorms to get back. And there's another story about thunderstorms in the AC-130. Electrically primed and fired. We had a demonstration U-boat where a guy slid up an automobile seat and touched the firing mechanism with his hand. It was enough to cause the guns to rotate. We carried Oku C-130 gunship ammunitions on that bird. I might mention here, we very seldom use the 20 millimeters in country. And we never used the 7.62 on the trails. They gave us away and they were ineffective. Fluttered black on the way down. So anyway, we worked our way back, and the Tinyon was under siege. And we could see flares, trip flares going off, tracers going back and forth, so we didn't know for sure who was there, where they were there. But I pulled over and started firing selectively around the perimeter where the trip flares had been set up by the invading parties. And we couldn't really work that well inside the perimeter because we didn't know where the friend ones were. So I was on the radio with the commander down there, and I said, I tell you what, I'm going to leave, like I'm going back to Saigon. And I'll be gone for about 5 minutes or something like that, and I'll be back. But in the meantime, get your people under the umbrella, and we'll see what happens. So I departed towards Saigon, about 5-7 minutes, something like that, and turned around. And when I came back, all hell had broken loose. It was full-fledged firing. But all of our troops were I ensured that all of our troops were under the umbrella. And the enemy was completely infiltrated the infield of the perimeter and headed for the people. And there were special forces troops there. There were a lot of civilians who were there. We had everybody under the umbrella. So I came back and turned on all 4 7.62. You guys probably haven't experienced a gunship with all those guns going off at the same time. And 7.62 was put around in every square foot of a football field. So the rain came heavily on the enemy at that time. And I said before, we weren't vulnerable to AAA because the biggest thing we had down in Saigon that we experienced was the 50 caliber. Well, flying my pattern around the compound, I happened to fly over a 50 caliber nest. And C-47 had been forecast to come in and get to relieve us. We had very little contact with the AC-47. But Colonel Kennegar, our ops officer, was riding his third pilot. And when he heard that the C-47 was inbound, and we flew at the same altitude, 3,500, he reached over my head and flipped on the anti-collision light. Boy, was that the wrong thing to do. There it was, right over a 50 cal, and they could hit us, and did. When we went to Right Pat, we saw 626, by the way, is mock ball up there. We could see the bullet holes that had been repaired in the aircraft. So the guy was stupid enough to keep firing at me, so I made continue 180 degree arc in the gun in the perimeter. And I caught him just where he was, shooting with tracers. And so he didn't shoot anymore after that. We sent him to his great glory, whatever it was. But anyway, because we'd been hit, we worked back to Saigon as best we could through the weather. Got it on the ground, rearmed, refueled, checked for any significant bullet holes that might have punctured something, but we didn't find anything. Most of the bullet holes were around. And so then we swapped seats, and Colonel Kennegar was the left seat, so now we became Spectre 03 and headed back to check to see how things were going at Tinyon. Well, they had removed a lot of the bodies and were taking them back to Cambodia. And we got a pepper basket call, which says, hey, you're in Cambodia. We didn't fly that gunship in Cambodia legally, except on this mission, Colonel Kennegar decided to chase them back into Cambodia. Caused an international incident at that time. But they were exonerated when they found out that a lot of the bodies had holes in the back. Holes in the body, but the holes didn't match. And what they'd done is taken the dead, or wounded back there, put different shirts on them, and so they exonerated us for killing civilians. So that was kind of the story of Tinyon, but if it hadn't been for Colonel reaching up and turning on that anti-collision light, I probably wouldn't have been awarded the medal I was awarded for that mission.
All right, thank you, sir. And for those that remember General Worcester, our former commander, his dad, Donald Worcester, was on the ground at Tinyon as the air liaison officer. And General Worcester, when he was here as the commander, told me this story before I even met Colonel Renault. And that's actually how I met Colonel Renault, is investigating and researching that story. Very interesting story. no direct connection with AFSOC. So now let's go off into combat operations on the trail. As the time wore on in 68 and getting into 69, a lot of missions flown, about, I'd say somewhere around 80 to 85% of missions were flown interdiction on the trail. Well, it turns out the North Vietnamese didn't like that. When gunships came over and became their arch nemesis very quickly, they'd rack up truck kills. You know, one aircraft would start out like 15 trucks a night as at 5,500 feet. They go up, and as a matter of fact, with Chief Vansel, by 71, early 72, they had, how many truck kills do you have in that one mission? 33 truck kills, and they had taken over 1,000 rounds of AAA. Back then, the navigator always counted out the IO and the right scanner called out the AAA and number of rounds. The navigator tallied it up. So when they landed, they found, and I know one crew had over 1,300 rounds fired at them in that time. And remind you that they're all tracers, and that's what really Chief Vansel, when he was right scanner, would call defensive maneuvers, and also Sergeant Patterson from the IO position. So they did this constant dance around the tracers, and well, you know, things started out at 5,500 feet, and they started taking a lot of hits. And actually, let's go to our next slide here. These are some of the results of flying at 5,500, even up to 7,500 feet. So altitude kept on going up. You had to go up in altitude in order to survive. So somebody came up with the idea, just like we're talking about innovation, let's go and find a gun that we can shoot at longer distances. 20 millimeter kind of tapped out at 7,500 feet. They would jud after that. Well, let's try out these 40 millimeter guns from the Navy. Okay, so they tried that. It worked. It took them all the way up to 10,000 feet. Now, I would like to ask, again, we're going back on the training element and the speed that is involved in all of these operations. I go to Dick Vansel, or Chief Vansel, and say, what kind of training did you get on that 40 when it showed up on the airplane?
Well, training that we didn't have was supposed to take place at Lockbourne. We got to Lockbourne. They didn't have any 130s, AC-130s. Trained on AC-119s. I trained on 20 mil gun systems and miniguns, which is good to know, but it's not very essential when you're flying on a gunship that doesn't have those. Anyway, my first day at Uman, I flew the second day I got there as a student. Had to have at least 10 flights by your instructor gunner, by your gun lead, which was Don Boudreau. Excellent instructor, by the way. Anyway, within about 7 days, less than 7 days, I had my 10 sorties because we were flying 2 sorties a night. But I was a student. I was the most junior person on the crew. I was an airman first class, so I was the gopher. I did everything that the crew didn't want to do, which is okay because that's my position. But within 10 days, they had me qualified as a gunner. That's the first time I worked on the 40 mil. I worked on it every night. And we blew the door off, the side door off the gun. We had hot rounds we had to take out and throw overboard and different things. But the training was involved, was basically full, complete OJT. But it was adequate.
Thank you. You see a theme here, people, that speed is everything, training, who really needs it? We'll figure it out as we go. That was pretty much standard. Even when I was on H-Balls, that kind of started out that way too. It morphed into something more, but it's a whole different world back then. Now, while we're on this same slide in battle damage, I want to point out that the next guy, I'm going to give him a little bit more time because I got 2 segments. That's Senior Master Sergeant Patterson. For those that don't know, he is one of 3 survivors on Spectre 1-3 that was shot down on June 18th of 1972. Just a few days ago was the anniversary, and we honor that anniversary every day. Also, we're talking about battle damage, anybody that flew on the H model, this is 573 when it took its first man pads, SA-7. That's the impact, that's the hole, and that's the hole that exited out the other side. The IO on that one was named Ken Felty. He got 36, if I remember right, frag hits in his body. Fortunately, he was wearing his helmet because that's actually what stopped him from being killed. His flight suit is actually on display up at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. So, the other thing, and the two segments I'm going to talk about before Senior Master Sergeant Patterson gets into Spectre 1-3 is this element right here. He was on this airplane too, and I begin to think you're snake bit, Bill, because that's when they lost. That was November of 1971, Prometheus 044, when they lost both props in the right-hand side and flew it all the way back to Ubon and recovered. So, Bill, if you could cover first that mission somewhat briefly, if you could, and then go right off into your experiences in the loss of Spectre 1-3.
You want me to hit 044 first?
Yeah, sure.
044 I had been crew chief on that plane prior at Naha and flew it behind that when I was flare kicker and flare ships, and behind that it flew out of Ubon at the same place. But I'd had prior experience with 044, so I was kind of home with that airplane. And the night that we was on this plane, it was my check ride. I was getting the check ride, and we took off, and everything was going pretty normal. And we come into the target area, and everybody was in their positions, and I was on the ramp, and we went into our first orbit. And the BC had picked up electronic signal of ignition. Something was on the ground. It wasn't moving, but it was definitely a good target transmission. So we locked in on that, and we started orbiting that. And the weird thing about that was it never moved. It was stationary. And we were on our second orbit, and was going in and out of the clouds. And I was laying back in the back, and all of a sudden, 3 big flashes flashed up around the right wing. And the plane shuddered very bad, like you hit the biggest pothole in the road you'd ever hit. And all of a sudden, the plane, you could feel it. It lurched up, and then it started a descent. And the right gunner, I couldn't see 3 and 4 engines from my position, but the right gunner then, in his seat, he jumped up. He was stunned. He was kind of disorientated and effed up. He said, "Oh my God, pilot, I didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming. 3 and 4 engines are gone." And everybody in the airplane's like, "What?" And the 3 or 4 engines are gone. And the flight engineer said, "Well, I still got power reading." And the gunner come back and said, No, they're gone." But the plane was in a steady descent, going down. And I'm back on the ramp, and pilot, Captain Bartle, said, "I'll get everybody ready for bailout." He said, "Get everything out. Get everybody ready for bailout." We happened to have another gentleman sitting right here in a burgundy shirt that was on the same plane I was on that night, and he was helping with save this airplane also. And the plane was in a rapid descent. You could feel it, like being in an elevator at slow speed. And we tended to get everybody put their harnesses on, got their parachutes ready. And that was my first experience with putting everything on I was required to wear. And the stand-up valve guy that was with me, all of that gear and winter flying suit and everything, we couldn't get our harness close enough to snatch the jet back off. It just wouldn't fit. And it took a major effort to get that done. But Captain Bartle was fighting the controls, he was stabilizing the airplane, but we was in a steady descent. And he told me, he said, "IO," he said, "if we pass through 2,500 feet, bail them out. Let them go." But he actually recovered the plane. I don't remember the exact altitude. He got it back under the control at about 3,500 feet and leveled it off. Well, it was holding that altitude. But to get back to base, or to get where we needed to go, we had to cross a whole line of mountains. It went up to about 5,000 feet. We was never going to make it. The plane would not climb over those mountains. And the navigator said, the pilot, he said, if we go to another base, was losing fuel fast. Fuel was going down very rapidly. He says, we'll never make it to another base. We don't have enough fuel. We won't have enough fuel. And so we had to either get straight to Ubon or we had to bail out. And I come up on the interphone to the pilot, and I said, pilot, I said, let's start throwing stuff out of this airplane. Let's take everything that we can get loose and get it out of the airplane. And just a few seconds or something later, the pilot, he come on the interphone and he said, okay, the IOs, the gunners, everybody in the back, he said, start dismantling everything, getting it out of the airplane. So that's what we started doing. 20s going out, belted, gunners working the 20 millimeter ammo cans out the back. 40s, we had the ammo stacked on the ramp in cans. We put 40s in the can, locking it up, and throwing it out the back. It was getting rid of the flares in the flare launcher. Anything that was not tied down was gone. And we got the plane stabilized, and it actually started rising very slow. And but when we got to the mountain range, and I did not know this till after we landed, we was all sitting in the back, and one of the gunners, and might remember who it was, but I'm back there, and the pilot, and somebody in the back was on the ramp, and he says, God, I think I see trees or something like that down there, I said, okay, all right, well, you're seeing things, but I didn't see anything, But we cleared the mountain by about 250 feet, and we came through a saddle. Yes, he shot the saddle, went through it, got on the other side, and from there it was always all downhill from that point. And but coming in on approach, and this all took place in a little over an hour. The time we took off, the time we had to come back, it was a little over an hour. When was coming in on approach, was coming out, it was about 5-10 minutes out, and I'm standing in the back by the 40 millimeter. And by the way, we were trying to figure out how to get the barrels out of 40 millimeters and throw them out too, but we figured they'd jam up and we might have to land it with barrels sticking out and drag it, We didn't make that. But was coming in on approach, not approach yet, was coming into the base, and I looked out the window, and number 2 engine was just throwing sparks, fire coming out the turbine. I mean, the engine had it. And I told the pilot, I said, pilot, we have trouble with number 2. And the flight engineer said, yeah, I noticed the heat going up. He said, the temperature on the turbines are climbing fast. I said, yeah. I said, I think we're getting ready to lose it because we just got a shower of fire, sparks coming out of that turbine. But the pilot said, well, we're committed. He says, we're going to land this plane. He said, we're going to do it. And it was coming in on approach, and then the flight engineer, before we come in right on our final, he said to our captain, our pilot, Captain Bartle, he said, do you want me to shut this number 2 engine down? He said, hell no, leave that thing running. He said, that's the only thing keeping us in the air. He said, I don't care if the turbine blows out of it, And so we come over the city of Ubon, and was coming down, and I had all the gunners were strapped in, and I was standing by the 40s, watching that turbine, because I was going to let them know if it totally failed. And I should have strapped myself in, but when the plane hit, that was the hardest landing I've ever had of 5,000 flight hours. That plane come down and it hit the ground, and the landing gear bottomed out. I seen the left wing bow down, and then you felt the plane lift back up, kind of like a bird trying to take off probably, and the wings went up, and the plane hit again, and that's kind of stayed on the ramp. And the pilot did a very strange thing. Common sense goes astray. He reversed the left wing engines, and it shot us off the runway. And we went out through the dirt. It was throwing dirt everywhere. It was in half on the runway, half in the dirt. It was blue lights flashing by us, and somehow he got it back up on the runway and got it straightened out. And we shut the thing down, and we all started trying to abandon the airplane. And the plane was setting with the left wing way down and the right wing sticking way up, and I was able to get the paratroop door open, but it was way up in the air, and one of the, I think it was the navigator, come running back through there, and he thought it was going to be a short step to the ramp, and he jumped off, or he stepped off, he just jumped out of the paratroop door and he hit the ground, and he turned around and let me, and he said, why did you let me do that? And I said, I have no control, but that was the story of 044.
Okay, thanks, and we'll hold off on the Spectre 1-3 until after the break. I will add that Worm Warner was lead gun on that aircraft as well. Sorry, Worm, I don't even remember what your retired rank is, but pardon me, Master Sergeant. Yeah, Worm was on that airplane. Tony DeNoy was on that airplane too, as a matter of fact. So, an incredible story of crew coordination. I've been in touch with Captain, he actually retired as Lieutenant Colonel Bartle. What a great guy. And you know, one of the best lines, and I wrote it in the book as well, he says, you know, I should have been scared, but I wasn't, because I didn't know any better. He says, when I landed after debrief, the whole crew went over to the O Club. Somebody handed me a bottle of Jim Beam, and I did my best to drink most of it. I'm like, yeah, that's the best line I heard. Chuck Bartle, that's a great pilot. So now I'm going to ratchet up to 1972, late 1972, when Colonel Frakes was there. Actually flew the very first trainable 105 gun aircraft. Prior to this, a lot of people are not aware, all guns were fixed up until that point, till late 72. The A model never had trainable guns. It was all stick and rudder flying. The E model, all stick and rudder. No trainable guns at all. The very first trainable gun, although the 105 did go on the airplane beginning in late February, early March of 1972, it was not trainable. It was fixed. So I would like to ask Colonel Frakes what his experience was in firing that first trainable 105 gun. Sir?
Right. Well, my experience with the trainable gun was it came in very handy because we went up, this was December of 1972. Got to take advantage of that modification. And probably one of the best things that ever happened to the gunship was getting the 105 gun plus getting the trainable function to work. And that's what I utilized to shoot my way out of a flak trap. We got sent out to Spec East, and not Spec, but the Laos, and the Steel Tiger is the lower panhandle of Laos, and that's where the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran that all the way down from up the north, down the south into Cambodia, and branching off into South Vietnam. And that's where mainly the truck traffic was what we were interdicting. With that Trainable 105, that particular night, I had a student FOCO, a lieutenant colonel that had just come in from Hurlburt to get checked out. So he was in the seat with the fire patrol, and then my rest of my crew was there, probably most of it, and I had an extra pilot who was riding along just to see how things, we ran the crew back then, and it has a few other guest crew members with us. We got out there, and also this particular night, whenever we went to the trail, we were supposed to have fighter escorts with us. Well, that particular night was a full moon. There was no escorts because the bombing of Hanoi was kicked off. The B-52s were going downtown up in Hanoi, and all the fighters had been pulled off to provide cover for the B-52s going in the strikes up north. Well, I mean, we were flying out there. We went out and did our tweak up in the Laos there along the west side of it. It was benign as far as AAA goes. After we did our and then we headed out for our, I think, Steel Tiger 3, 4, and 5, which is about midway down the trail. Well, as we got finished, we headed looking for other trucks out there. We got tracking along, and the IO at this time says, "Well, I guess we saw some tracers up ahead. So why don't we go over and check out what's going on over there?" And that's one of the things that we found out, that the North Vietnamese would fire up tracer rounds to indicate that the gunships were in the area. Well, we went on there, and then we started getting in closer, and we started to pick up a truck or two. So we started shooting at the vehicles that we could find, and then about that time, then we started getting tracers all around us. Well, we had a IR, a TV operator. We're out scanning around the coordination between the fire control officer and the sensor operators. The IR would search around, he'd find a gun site, and then the fire control officer would select the TV to go on and track the site. And I would roll in and put the aircraft in the right parameters there as far as getting in the what we call the tremble box, and the TV operator would shoot the weapon. And the first rounds were hitting real close, and of course they called them directs, but later on, when they evaluated their BD-8 tapes, they said, "No, you just silenced them." But we went out and kept doing that, and then the IR and TV operator kept working back and forth, finding the different gun sites, and then we were using the 105 exclusively because that's the only Tremble one gun we had at that time, and we wound up were able to knock out 13 trucks and 11 gun sites that we silenced during that mission. So it worked out real well for us.
All right, sir. Thank you. Now we're up on a break here in a moment, but I think that I would be derelict if I didn't say the record. North Vietnamese claimed that Spectre, the gunship, killed was 9,600 something trucks during the war, where we claimed that there was just over 10,000. So it's a pretty good number when you figure 6 years worth of work and you interdict those trucks to that level. It was the most effective interdiction platform in theater. More truck kills than anybody else. There was some controversy over that over the years, but it's all been proven and validated. They repaired a lot of trucks and put them back in service, but nevertheless, the crews racked up a very impressive count. Different kind of warfare than what those going downrange now are accustomed to, but that's where it was at the time. So, all right. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll open it up for all questions from the audience. All right, while Colonel Cahoon is making his way to the stage, that's all right, sir. I'll go ahead and point out, I put back up on the screen the cover of the history book that every one of these gentlemen is mentioned in, their personal stories of combat activity in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. As a matter of fact, many of them helped me write it, and it took me 7 years to put that book together. It's going to be released to the public this fall sometimes. The official date of release is 14 December, but we think it's going to be before then. So if you're interested in true, actual, genuine gunship history at the operator level, this is what you want to see. Ghostriders 6875. There's a second book that I also wrote to be out next year. It's Ghostriders from 76 through 95, which takes us to the whole life cycle of the AC-130A and a good portion of the AC-130E and H. So, all right. So, welcome back. Before we open it up for general questions, I have one thing that's been kind of burning in the back of my brain for a while, and this is for Master Sergeant Davis. Sir, did you ever think that 54 years ago when you started this whole project that we'd be sitting here today talking about the new AC-130s that we're building?
No, did not. We knew we had something good, and then it became great. And I said, well, after the Vietnam War, this would be it, you know. What else could they use it for? Well, you know, technology has really come along. You know, we had the 7.62, the 20s, then they put the 40s on it, then the 105. Now you got a 30. You know what I mean? It's just moving up all the time, getting better all the time. So, no, I had no idea that 54 years later that I'd even be alive. Much less be talking about a gunship that was started in 1967. But anyway, it was a great program. It's still a great program. And it's one of the best weapon systems in the United States Air Force right now.
Thank you, sir. And I will add, too, when I arrived on Herbert in 1978, they told me, don't plan on staying here long because the gunship's going to be retired. We're getting rid of them. Yeah, they were wrong. So, all right, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. And we do have a microphone here that we can send down there. So, who's got the first one? I know somebody's got to have a question out there. Don't be shy. Jump on there. And that includes you guys, too, from Period Correct Guys. Oh, come on. Bill, I know you got to have something. Well, sir.
So, a lot of you had talked about your prior experience being crew chiefs or multiple thousand hours in C-130s prior to coming to gunships. Did you ever feel that your training, as you guys talked about as well, was inadequate, to say the least, or seemed like it was rushed? Did you feel that you went to combat to Vietnam inadequately trained, you just learned to go with it, or was it just you were able to fall back on all that prior experience, probably a larger crew as well?
All right. Did you guys catch all that? All right. The question, in case it didn't get recorded down there, is: do you feel that your experience level benefited you when you went to combat and you were not trained properly to go do a gunship mission, but you were trained properly to do other missions on other aircraft, including C-130s? Anybody would like to take hold of that? Okay. Colonel Cahoon first.
I went into the gunship program with a fair amount of experience in A models, B models, and H models. I had all the confidence in the world in the airplane. I knew it was a good airplane. I knew it would get you there and get you back if you treated it right. As far as the training for gunships, I never felt it was inadequate. There just wasn't a lot of it. And I guess we were so full of whatever and vinegar, when we got there, we knew that, hey, we're here to do a job, and we're I guess, the best that there is. We were the only ones, so you had to be the best. So, a feeling of inadequacy? No, we didn't feel inadequate at all. We just had a job to do, and by God, we're going to go do it, and we did it.
All right, and Colonel
This is Dick again, just a second.
Yeah, I had the advantage with the disadvantage of not getting any training at all. They took us straight out of the C-130A models at Patrick and straight into combat. Fortunately, we had Ken Ginger and Jack Halo as our instructors, and we were there at a time that the AAA was not what it got into later on, and they didn't know who we were on the ground, and we didn't know who they were on the ground, so both sides kind of grew up together. And then they started Lockbourne. I didn't go to Lockbourne, but we got the results of what Lockbourne was putting out. And we could usually tell, as instructors, which pilots that came over had been trained by the combat Ken and Jack, who were both at Lockport, and which ones hadn't. We had to break a few bad habits that they had been taught in the formal school. And for the most part, it was very successful. There were some hard-headed students that thought they had learned how to fly combat from other non-combat pilots, and lost a few of those, by the way.
Chief asked.
Yes, I was just going to say that I want to second that Aubrey's comments about the lack of training. I think the lack of training was actually beneficial because I was a young kid. I didn't have any life training, much less gunship training, and very little AC-130 40 mil training. So what I got was on the job, and we got shot at every night. We shot at every night we went to Laos. We were shot at. So it was always pretty exciting, but you had to learn quick. And we learned as a team, and we built a crew, and it worked real well. So it all seemed to work out.
Thank you. Yeah, that brings me then, good transition there, Dick, because my next question was going to be, what level of crew coordination did you have back then? Now, mind you, the gunship, when the final configuration of the E model and H model eventually was 14-man crew. A lot of people yakking at the same time. Did you have any difficulties throughout the years in crew coordination, and how did you deal with crew coordination?
On our crew, the crew coordination was very tight and very close. The gunners coordinated very tightly with the flight engineer and the IO, that was the package, and then the officers in the booth, and of course the table nav and the pilot and co-pilot and so forth, flight engineer on the flight deck. But we kept the chatter down to a minimum. We stayed off the open mic. We did everything in the dark, blacked out, had a flashlight in your mouth, possibly. They'll send you a flashlight, otherwise you worked in the dark. And you talked with each other very little. So we listened to all the inbound calls and all the escorts. You could pull them off of other networks, but we didn't comment, kept it quiet.
We was flying hard crews at the time. We had a hard crew. That was your crew from the time you got there to the time you left. And one of the things about crew coordination and being a crew like that is you are bonded together, and that you can recognize each other's voice, and you can tell how bad the situation is by how high pitched he is or the language he's using. You know, and you got used to that crew, and it was you were a family, and your one thing was to see that your crew went out, got the mission done, but everybody came home alive. And that's one of the big advantages of a hard crew. You're a family, and you'll do anything it takes to get that crew back. You know?
I think a lot of those principles apply to everybody that's sitting in this room flying today. Crew coordination is optimum. It's everything as far as when I was flying, that was it too. I agree with that. Anybody else got a question out there they want to bring up? Sir?
Say something about training.
Oh, go ahead.
On our prototype, we had no training. You was qualified pilot, co-pilot, nav, flight engineer. You were qualified in your aircraft. But as far as being in the gunship, no one had any training. Our training came, we were all on JT, on the job training. That's what we all were doing. We were learning as we went. We learned here on this range, and we learned in Vietnam. We learned enough that we were able to train the crews that came in 1968 to relieve us, that they were qualified to do their job. So the initial crew had no training. Our gunners were new at this. We only carried 2 gunners on the flight, and they did a wonderful job. We had a IO and he just watched for AAA and ground fire. But no one on that plane had any gunship training because this is his first one. And we learned enough to teach the other crews, which they were so successful in. And they grasped it so fast because they were qualified aircraft. And you had the gunners that knew the guns, so it went better. Hope that answers your question about training.
All right, I think Colonel Cahoon had some comments.
I think I mentioned earlier about training, that we learned a lot of it, like Sergeant Davis said, on the job. Little tidbits of things here and there that we picked up, and I remember one in particular. If you see a truck going down the road and he's pulling a trailer, be careful. Shot the guy one night, he kept going, he wouldn't stop, he probably was armored. I guess he finally got tired of it, he stopped, got out, went back, rolled out his gun, he was pulling a 37 millimeter, and he started shooting back at us. And I thought that was kind of, unfriendly. So you had to be kind of careful, pick your targets very well. Crew coordination, I was lucky, I came out of the satellite recovery business in Hawaii, so I was accustomed to having a 12-man crew. And I'd done that for 4 years, and so the crew coordination came a little easier for me because of the fact that I had been doing it for a long time. As I recall, we had a separate intercom system for the guys in the back end in the gunship. And the gunners had their own, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the gunners had their own intercom. And so they could do their thing without being interrupted by us on the flight deck and vice versa. So it worked out okay.
Chief Busgate, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. This is related to mechanical aptitude. It sounds like a lot of the training, there was ingenuity to learn in flight, to learn in progress. Today's crews don't have engineers now, so we don't have the mechanical expertise. How important was that mechanical expertise as gunners having to put the guns together, make one good gun out of the set or whatever the case, or helping to change DC generators when you got to get an airplane back in service? How key was that mechanical aptitude for a crew member at that time?
All right, Senior Master Sergeant Patterson?
On the A model, it was very important. You had to know the aircraft, the mechanical portions of it, and most everybody did. They were all qualified. And yes, everybody helped everybody in any position. Afterwards, you helped shovel shells out and everything. We did not dump shells over the trail because they could be used again. So we brought them back. And when we first went over, we didn't even have flash suppressors on the weapons. So we got flash suppressors. Then we had the tracers. Well, tracers were good. You could see where it's going, but they could see where it's coming from, too. So then we had to sit on the tail and delay the tracers out of the ammo before we put it in, So anyway, it was a learning experience. The ammo dump, they finally learned that we don't want tracers. So we carried HEI and API, that's all. HEI was up front, API was in the rear for the 20s. Anyway, working as a crew and the mechanical portion was very important.
Well, in the old days, we pilots, young pilots, were trained from the get-go by our flight engineers about the aircraft. And there wasn't much we couldn't do as far as mechanical concern. And the other situation was our flight engineers were a pertinent part of our aiming bit. They handled all the guns and they called out our angle back for us because we had to have exactly a 30-degree angle back and airspeed. Co-pilots ran the airspeed, so it was an integrated system. Now, when they tell us we don't have any FEs and we don't have any navigators, my God, I don't know how you guys operate. Maybe you play a lot of cards in that cockpit, but we relied on everything we had.
Senior Master Sergeant Patterson?
My position, the IO, you were required, when I come in, you had to be at least 1 less than 5 level, and you had to be an E4 or an E5. Okay? And there was many reasons behind that in 1970. And one of the reasons that I was given when I went through Lockbourne was that if that plane takes a hit and the flight engineer is down, you're in his seat. You move to his seat, because there was very, very little difference in that time frame between a full-blown crew chief and a flight engineer. And that was a big fight, even in the Air Force at that time. Designated a true flight engineer who was panel qualified and a crew chief on C-130s that could go to school and everything to become a flight engineer. Oh, there's a big fight going on there. But what the crew chief was, and I'm not saying he was totally qualified as a flight engineer, but he had the capabilities. If that plane was badly damaged, and flight engineer and some of the pilots and everybody was damaged, he could get that flight engineer seat and balance out the fuels, keep the hydraulics working. He knew the props. He knew everything about that area, and that was his job. And I tell people this: well, my crew, and I got selected for a reason because I've been working on my private pilot license. But my crew selected me to help get when we was returning from the mission and everything. I'd crawl in the co-pilot seat, and they familiarized me with the flying of the airplane and everything. If that cockpit got hit, and I was the only one on my crew that had any little training in flying, that I'd get in that seat and try and get that plane home. That's just the way we worked it. And I've many times I flew the plane back with the pilot sitting seat and I was in the co-pilot seat to was about 6, 7, 8 miles out from the end of the runway. I think some of my gunners, you got that pinch factor and around in the back sitting in the seat. I think some of them sitting in the booth had that pinch factor and had to pry them out of the booth when we was coming in. But it was that factor was a big part of our survival back then.
Thank you. More questions from Sir?
This is for Sergeant Davis. What was it like working with the original 626 cadre and Ron Terry? What was the attitude like about when you were just developing another weapon system, or did you think you were really starting something great?
Well, we knew we were starting something great. Ron Terry, the godfather of gunships, he's the one that did the AC-47, Gunship Gray. He's the one that did this one. So we knew we were doing something great.
And I will add too that recently I talked to Colonel Terry and Master Sergeant Davis talks to him very regular. He is actually in hospice care now. They are the last two of the original gunship developers, Colonel Terry and Master Sergeant Davis.
Ron Terry was never qualified in the C-130, but he was a fantastic pilot. And as an IP, we put him in the left seat and let him shoot and fire, just act like he was a qualified C-130 pilot.
Yeah, we couldn't get away with that nowadays. All right, more questions? Sir?
That's our master for so that's a question for you. Talk about the training piece a little bit. The crew's knowledge, what was it like for your publications at that time? Was it stuff that was handed down from the AC-47 as far as weapon systems, or was it stuff that you guys were making up on the fly? And how was that process related to the other crews? It was mentioned we started to learn when they were shooting that was to let the gunships know, or to let the ground guys know the gunships were in the area. How are you guys relaying all this information back and forth, lessons learned, things of that nature?
Sir Patterson?
When I was in Standard Val there in late 72, all through 73, the gunships were changing fast and changing right at DuPont. We were getting new equipment in and being put on the airplane. We had officers in the squadron that was engineers, and they were coming up with things, and a lot of times we didn't even ask right Pat if we could do it. We say, we're going to do it, it's done, now what? But we had to change our pre-flight constantly. And I know in 1973, I changed the E model checklist, I know, probably at least 6-7 times in 9 months. Stuff that was being installed on the airplane constantly, and you had to redo them checklists to make sure everything got checked.
The original H model, even when I got here, every aircraft was wired differently than the other. And the problem was that, well, each one had their own addendum to the TO. They were never intended to last that long. Although we fooled them, that's generally the way it was. There was holes in the airplane that weren't supposed to be there. There were patches. There was all kinds of things. There was one that had it had straps that went all the way over the top for Berry pistols to fire on the left side of the airplane. There were all kinds of cutting and pasting back then. Stuff that we could, no way we could get away with that now. Dick, you had something?
I just wanted to say real quick that basically we all had a standard dislike for the standard out folks.
Hey,
so we didn't worry about them until they flew with us. And when they flew with us, we read our checklist and we followed the procedures.
The only thing that people hate worse than Stan Val is headquarters guys, and guess where I work. So there you go. All right. More questions, sir?
It's talking about check rides. Senior Patterson, did you Q1 when you couldn't get the on your check ride? The engines got shot off. You couldn't get your chute on. You couldn't get your gear on. Did you still Q1 your check ride?
We brought that up to the people in the squadron and our life supports, peaceful and everything. And the best thing we could come out with the harnesses that we were wearing is when you put them on, you carried your chest straps as far out as you could get them, you know. And because it was for especially the IO, because we wore a little bit more stuff than some of the other guys did. It was just a major operation to get them chest straps out.
Sergeant Pearson?
Yes. How did your tactics develop? When you're in the initial cadre and started flying, of course, the threats got more advanced, your weapon systems got more advanced. How did you develop your tactics and how did they evolve to where they were at the time?
For those that may not hear, he's asking how tactics developed and how they developed tactics.
You have to learn pretty fast how to get on target and get off target, because if you maintain that particular pattern, you won't get shot. So you develop, that's sort of thing. You'll learn never to turn right, because all that did was point your guns to the moon, keep you blinded from what was coming up on the right side. There was an advantage that you had the co-pilot between you and what was coming at you. Kind of pissed off the co-pilots when you did it. Usually you had that, and you always turned into the target, not away from it.
We're on the trail out there. They're pretty sharp. They know how to move their AAA around. On one mission one night, we was out and there was a vehicle down there, and he was flashing his lights. So they said, "Well, that's a target." Well, then the lights went out, then he came back on. Then he started backing up. Then he would go forward. Then he would flash his lights some more. Well, you know, your old gut kid, after a while, an old gut feeling, and I told the pilot, I said, "Pull off from this target." He said, "No, I'm going to take that truck out." I said, "Please pull off." Yeah. And he didn't. And they got us in the flat trap. About that time, everything came up at 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. And believe me, that airplane is going through some maneuvers to evade all of that stuff coming up at you.
Yeah, and if you knew you were close to target and hit something and nothing happened, you better get your ass out of there. Because that was it was leading into a flat trap.
We shot bicycles, elephants, and everything. So I think, you know, you get secondary explosion out of it.
What they used to call Dr. Pepper AAA, 10, 2, and 8 for those guys that remember that old slogan on Dr. Pepper.
in on the ramp, the IO had about 180-degree view of the whole airplane from right wing to left wing. And I've seen the AAA coming up so heavy that you didn't really know where to go. And you only had 6 seconds to make that decision. I mean, 6 seconds sounds like a long time, but when you're laying there, it's a lifetime. And what we would do, and this happened to me many times, and it's marked in my little flight log, is with special locations, is that when the AAA was very accurate, you would brake for him, you'd call for an immediate brake in the direction to try and get you around that AAA. And that was a learning factor for any IO, right scanner, or anything else, because you just don't learn that in school. And we didn't have a way to teach that, because we had no simulators or anything that was really functional.
There's a standard way to operate at AAA, and if the tracers are moving, don't worry about it. When they start standing still, it's like you're driving down a highway and you see the stone hit your windshield, you're on a director. Of course, so you change whatever parameters you can.
Right, if that tracer, if that plane and that tracer isn't moving, and it's just getting brighter, and brighter, and brighter, and you can't see the track on either side, you're hit. You're hit.
626.
You call for a hard brake, and one time, I'll just use this as an example, it was the AAA all around me was so accurate that the only way I could see to try and get that aircraft through it was to make a hard brake to the right, which was you in the left order to brake into the right. Well, that's a long way around, but I called a hard brake to the right. And I kept watching that, and it just kept getting brighter. And I swear to God, it was going to hit me in the face. I don't care. That's what it looked like. And I just jumped up off the ramp, and I started running towards the cockpit. And I heard it go through the sound barrier as it came by the airplane. You could hear the rounds go through the sound barrier.
626 got his first
Smoke is swirling smoke as they go by. It was that I've seen them personally go through the tip of the right wing, the tip of the tail, right up underneath the
626 got his first Purple Heart in Cantho, Vietnam. We didn't know it until we landed, but we took a round through the #1 fuel tank. So, the only thing you can do is break off a broomstick, drive it up in the hole, and fly it out of there, and that's what we did.
Story of the truck and the flak trap sounds very familiar. We were working in an area one night, and here's this truck trying to ford a stream. And I was in the right seat with my roommate, Ward Meyer, and Ward says, "Let's get him a sitting duck." And he starts to roll in, and all hell broke loose. There were 4 guns, came up simultaneously, and like you said, they were every position all the way around us. So we learned right off the bat, that's part of our training that we got. We'll watch out for stuff like that. We had an agreement, Ward and I flew together most of the time, and we agreed that if one of us spent more than about 1 orbit on a target, the guy in the right seat says, "I have the controls," and he would break out and get away. Because it's easy to get target fixation. You want to get that guy so bad, you'll stay in there hanging and try to get him. And it's just suicide. When we got in the trap, I just remember ducking. One round went between the fuselage and #3 engine. A lot of them came right across the windscreen. And I remember ducking so hard I hit my head on the little Lockheed medallion on the control wheel. I jokingly said, "Hey, you guys won't put me in for a Purple Heart." I got a little nub on my head here because I ducked so hard.
All right, so I'm gonna re-engage with Senior Master Sergeant Patterson right now because I believe there's some really good takeaway lessons in the loss of Spectre 1-1. Now keep in mind, Spectre 1-1 was a model gunship flying on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They were up at, I believe, 11.5 altitude. The North Vietnamese wanted back gunships so bad they put an SA-7 crew on high terrain about 3,500 feet to close the distance and waited for a gunship to show up. It just happened to be Bill and his crew that night. Incredible story of survival and being prepared. I will say this, Bill also was a commercial or sport jumper prior to this. That's probably why he's here today, because the ordeal that he's going to explain to you here in just a few minutes is harrowing, to say the least. So I'll hand it over to you.
I like to stand up when I'm talking to you about this because I get anxious and I start putting my seat in my hands. But that night, I was, just to give you a quick knowledge, the night before my crew was taxiing out and the nose gear broke off, went up underneath an airplane, come up in 20 millimeter bin. Well, we aborted that mission because the plane had to be lifted and crane and took off the runway. Well, when I got back the next morning, I got a phone call. I was in barracks, I was asleep, and they said, "You're on the flight schedule. We put you on because you didn't get flight mission last night, so you're on tonight." So I went down that night, and I had a instructor. I was an instructor standing out. I had another guy that needed to get checked out, and he was on the plane with me. Well, we got a bad start off. We were not a normal crew. This crew had been put together, talking about crew coordination, one at a time. You from over here, you from over here, pilot over here, pilot over here. Well, the big mistake, one of the big mistakes, and I ain't saying he wasn't a good pilot, but the new pilot had never flown a combat mission in the gunship. And they put him in the pilot. He was chosen to fly that night with an instructor pilot. Well, the instructor pilot put him in the left seat, and the instructor pilot was in the right seat. Well, we aborted one plane that night. That got us a bad start off. We had to do a hot turn on the runway where plane taxiing in, didn't have any write-ups. We went out, we jumped on that plane, we loaded it up, fueled it up, changed crew, boom, it was gone because it was going to be late on target. Well, as we was coming across Way Vietnam, we got swept by SAM radar. And that in our EWO, actually, we had a lock on. And he called lock on, and we did a small break and went down, to some 5,000 feet or something like that, and came out over Way, but we climbed back up, come all into the Oshawa Valley. Well, we come in on the valley, and we was all in our crew positions and everything, and we instantly picked up truck movement, intersection road that came down the north. Oshawa Valley is the main supply line for the North Vietnamese into South Vietnam. Well, we went into an orbit, we were tracking, and it was one or two trucks down there, and we were cleared to fire, and we fired off 2 or 3 rounds, and they were doing okay, but the gunners had a problem with the barrel that was catching the round and had to reposition it. Well, after the barrel's repositioned, we went back into the orbit and everything, and all of a sudden, I was laying back there, the guys that checking, he was all the way to the right, I was halfway on the ramp in the left. Flare launcher was laying between us, the controls for the flare launcher. My parachute was to the rear of my, to my rear. I always put my right leg on top of my chest pack. And he was over there, and he had called in this 37 millimeter that was firing at us. It was coming up from about the 3 o'clock position. It was arching over and everything. And the F4s that was above us was called in the same fire. And so we kept our orbit, and we come on around, and just as we were coming to complete the orbit, all of a sudden that 37 fired 3 or 4 rounds that went up. Well, it wasn't 5, 6 seconds after that, all of a sudden a big white blue flash come off the ground. And it started. And if you've ever been engaged in combat, your first surge of adrenaline is in that first engagement. And I mean, your adrenaline just lights you up. Your mouth goes dry, your pulse goes up, your vision changes, everything. But this was a missile. It had been fired. And it came off the launcher, and it came SA-7s do this. They wave up like a porpoise going through the water. This missile just come up in a smooth, curved, blue-white climb. And it was coming extremely rapid. And I called, the other IO hadn't said anything, but I instantly called for a hard break right, because we wanted to break into those missiles. We did not want to show them our tailpipes, because if it was an IR missile, it was going to lock onto that, so we'd call for a hard break to the right. Well, I called for a hard break. The plane just continually went in, stayed in the left orbit. And I literally screamed over the mic, break right hard. And the plane kind of leveled out, not leveled out, but he brought the wings over and he was going into what was going to be probably a right break, but it wasn't a snap like this. It was a nice, smooth, controllable turn. Well, just as that plane started that roll, that missile swept by me, come up right off of the right side of the plane, came up right by the flare launcher and went right into the right wing. There's a big kaboom. And for about 4 or 5 seconds, I thought, well, at least we're not on fire. Well, that didn't last long. Just all of a sudden, there was major fire just erupted all over that right wing. And the huge tunnel of orange, blue, yellow, whirling fire, trailing black smoke, looked like something out of World War II. Picture you've probably seen, they go black and white, it's where they get hit and they're trailing smoke. It was whirling way behind us. And I'm sitting back, and I reach back and I grab my chute instantly. And I unhook my lanyard and I throw it to the rear, and I jump up off the ramp, because I wanted to go over here next to the flare launcher, see if I could see any damage, but I also wanted to watch to see if that 37 millimeter was going to open up on us. And the pilot leveled the plane out, and he asked for instant heading to the nearest base. Well, he pulled her up, he leveled her out, and we were actually, I think we were headed to Wade, Vietnam. It leveled it off. Well, just as I had got in that position, had my parachute in my hand, the plane shook real bad. And the flight engineer told the pilot, he said, "Pilot, we're losing altitude." And about that, and just right after he said that, I felt the plane lift up. The plane went nose up, and it went into a climb. And I'm sure the pilot was trying to recover the plane out of that loss of altitude and was pulling it up. Well, right after that occurred, something in the front of the airplane just made a big kaboom. And I can't tell you what it was. Could have been a piece of the engine, could have been a piece of the flap, but something went through the fire and went right into the night, right off the airplane. It was gone. And the plane started nosing, left nose down, the right wing started up like this, and the plane, I knew what was happening. I've been in this before. I knew exactly what was taking place. The plane was going down. And it was rolling up, the tail was turning up like this, the plane was rolling over, and she was getting ready to go down. So I jump up, I get down on my knees, and I just pull my chute up, and I lay it up here and roll up in it, like that. And it wasn't 4 seconds after I did that the plane was vertical and going over. And it took every piece of strength I had in my body to push myself over the edge of that ramp to where the momentum, your weight was outside the airplane to the inside, and your momentum picked you up, and all of a sudden, gravity took over, and it just shot me out of the back. I bounced off the tail, I hit the tail, and then everything went black. Well, I was falling through the dark, and I skydived right 300 jumps. That's virtually what I'm here talking to you tonight. And I was falling through the night, and I roll over on my back, and I still had my hands closed like this, but it was nothing. I didn't realize that I didn't have anything in my hand. And I rolled over on my back, and I was skydiver emergency position, because we had always, the old days, we had to take a chest pack, to roll on their back, and pull it out, and throw it in the air, and all that stuff. That's the way it was. But when I got stable and I seen where I was going, there was no chute there. There was nothing there. So here I am, laying on my back, falling through the sky, and no parachute. And I said, oh shit, this is it. It's over, you know. And I made up my mind, I'm just going to stay on my back because I don't want to watch the ground rush come. But I was laying there, and all of a sudden I felt something bouncing off the top of my helmet on my left side, bouncing off the helmet. And I reached out and said, well, shit. Sorry, ladies. That's my harness over here. And what had happened is somehow, and I can't stand here and even tell you how that happened, the eyelet on the back of the chest pack had hooked over the snap of the left side of the harness. And it had come loose, and then up here, and it was up here, waving around, bouncing off my helmet. And I reach up, and there's my chute. I said, oh my gosh, there's my chute. So what it was, I tried to reach the ripcord, well, it wasn't where it was supposed to be. You ain't there. And I thought, oh my God, it broke off. Now this is what you think when you're in this position. And I reach up and I unsnap the cover that covered the ripcord, the ends on the ripcord. I unsnapped the cover, and I reached in and I said, I felt it. I said, holy cow, well, the pin's there, the ripcord's got to be somewhere. But what I'd done, instead of carrying it the way I always carried it, have the ripcord on the right side, when I picked that chute up, I turned it and it's on the left side. And I just followed it down, there was the ripcord, and I gave her a yank. And that chute opened up, and I, honest to God, I thought I broke my neck. Because at this one lanyard, you're falling at terminal speed, and when that chute opened, it pulled me up like this and snapped my neck backwards in the back of my helmet, hit my shoulder back here in the lower part of my back. Come to a stop, and I instantly, you know in survival school, they always say, orientate yourself really quickly, so you know where you're at. Well, I just come to a quick stop, and I'm looking around me real fast. They just all kind of pieces of airplanes around me, everywhere. Stuff fluttering through the air, big ball of what looked like smoke falling in the air. And I look down on the ground, and I see my plane, parts of it hit the ground and explode. And I stabilized myself, and the plane, there's just pieces falling everywhere. And the plane, and I'm pretty sure I seen the flare launcher burning because it was just brilliant white hot. And the flare launcher, magnesium flares, that's just the way they burn. And it was away from the rest of the aircraft, but I got stabilized, and I got myself orientated, and there was the F4, I don't think he agreed with me on this, but there was a 37 millimeter shooting. And I don't think he was shooting at me. I think he was celebrating. I really do, because there's a big reward out for the gun crew that knocked this gunship out of the sky, because it was trying to get all the data they could on the gunship. One just got knocked out of the sky. And I think they were firing rounds off celebrating. But as I was drifting down, I looked down, there was another crew member, or another parachute, I can't say a crew member, there's another parachute, probably 1,000 feet above the airplane, was drifting across the fire where the plane was burning. And the last time I seen him, he was going through the smoke and haze of the fire and everything, and I lost track of him, and I was tracking off to the right, headed to the side of a small hill or mountain where I would end up landing. I went down crashed through the trees, hit the ground, and the tree, my shoe caught in the tree, my feet were not firmly on the ground, but I could feel the ground under my feet. They always tell you back then that you might be standing on a limb or something, be careful, don't undersnap and shoot and everything, but I knew I was on the ground because I could feel the ground around me and see the growth. I just unsnapped it and started my the next level of survival here. And I followed all the instructions from the survival school, took account of everything I had, got my winter flying suit off, because that's what we wore, got my harness off and everything. I made some mistakes, leaving variants and stuff I should have took with me. But I started E&E that night, because in survival school, if you land on the side of a mountain, they tell you to go to the military crest, 2/3 up, 1/3 down. And I was on the side of a mountain. I didn't know how high it was, but that's where took off, started up the mountain. And a big thunderstorm moved in. We'd seen that up over the north. It was flashing lightning and everything. It started raining real hard. I sat about 2 hours in a heavy downpour. And after the rain was over, the jungle, like somebody flipped on a fluorescent light, the jungle just lit up green. You seen Avatar, the movie? That wasn't that intense, but the jungle was glowing. And it kind of got I didn't know what was going on, you know? But I could see growth, I could see trees, I could see stumps, I could see everything. And I think that's probably due to some adrenaline and no telling what else was going on. But I E&E'd, and I got into I was going to contact the SAR, the F4s above me, and I pulled out my radio, and the top of my radio was busted off. Whole top was gone. And I said, well, that ain't good. But I put it back in my vest, and I pulled out the other one. But my other radio had the antenna knocked off of it. It was just messed up. Well, I was smart enough to take the broke radio, take the battery out of it. The antenna was still on the side, and you could unscrew the antennas back then. I unscrewed the antenna on that radio, and I put it in my vest because I wanted to get out of there, and went and found a place where I felt half secure under growth and trees and everything that swapped out the antennas, and I was able to finally talk to the F4s and OB10s that were circling. Well, that got me through the night, and come early morning, the A1Es were in the area, F4s were on station, getting ready to put in strikes and all kinds of stuff. And unknown to me, and I think Bill can verify this, there was about 5,000 North Vietnamese north of me, 4 miles away.
I hear they didn't like you. I hear they didn't like you.
They didn't like me. And unknown to me also, 2 other guys, when plane disintegrated, the FOCO and the TV got blown through the trash. The far as they got was a booth door in the airport. And that's when the plane started breaking apart. And somehow they survived all of that, and they was able to pull their parachutes. One of them opened about 100 feet above the ground, and the other one said maybe if he was lucky, it seemed like him it was 50 feet because the parachute opened and wham, he hit the ground. And he broke his hand, he broke his leg. But they were taken wounded first, and then they were going to take the other one. But I was told later on that by intel and other people that somewhere between 250 and 300 North Vietnamese was headed towards my area. They had evidently seen my parachute, and they were headed towards me. Well, I didn't know that at the time, but I started hearing noise in the distance, and the F4 pilot and the OB10 pilot, they told me, he said, find you a good place, you hide. He says, you get your camouflage on, drink all of your water. You're supposed to drink all of your water to keep yourself hydrated and everything. He said, we're going to make first light survival attempt. Well, I followed all the instructions and everything, but what I thought was a pretty good hiding place. There was thick growth and everything, and the only thing I had, my feet was kind of sticking out a little bit, but I could see through the brush and everything. It was like little holes in it, and I could see through it. And I'm sitting there, and I hear a huge noise. And I'm sitting there, and you get that adrenaline surge again because it had been real quiet, and all of a sudden you hear this noise, and it's coming from my right, and I just freeze, and the noise kept getting louder, and I took out my 38. I'd already loaded my 38. I took out my 38, and I laid it on my chest, and I reached down and stabbed my Gilbert combat knife, and I pulled that out of the sheath, and I had that in my left hand, had my pistol in my right hand, and I laying there like this, and I can't tell you exactly the number, but it was somewhere like 3 to 4, maybe 5 North Vietnamese soldiers probably moved through in the jungle no farther than me and your exit signs back there, maybe not even that far, because that was kind of a huge elephant grass out there in front of me, and I could see them moving through it. Well, they moved through there, and now it's about, I'm saying 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, the sun's up, everything clear. and my adrenaline settled back down. I'm still laying there, and all of a sudden I hear another noise, and this time it was closer. I'm laying there, and the noise kept getting louder, and it was like if you're a hunter and you're used to hunting in the woods and a deer's coming up on you or a bear, you can hear him rustling leaves or breaking twigs and stuff. This is what this was. And being a hunter from the mountains of North Carolina, I knew this was not a good thing. And I was laying there and I seen the bushes start moving a little bit, and it was about 15, maybe yards in front of me, maybe 10 yards in front of me, and I was set in the clearing of North Vietnamese soldier. He had an SKS in his right hand. Pretty sure it was an SKS. And he had a khaki type uniform on with a pit on. Pretty well dressed for being in the area. And I'm laying there and I'm froze. I mean, I just froze because he's looking around. He's got his SKS up like this. And he turned around, and I'm going to stop it right here in a minute. It was young. He was dead in front of me. And he makes a turn to the left. And I'd already pulled my pistol up when I see him coming. When I see him walking out in the grass. Excuse me.
This Martinez.
I'd say my son's Chinese, and he was probably 15, 16 years old. And he turns this way with his rattled up. And I swear he looked straight into my soul. And this is where I'll end it. The next thing I know, I'm somewhere else with an empty revolver and blood all over. And I moved to the left and moved back into a real thick, heavy growth on the farther up the mountain, maybe 100 yards, 200 yards up the mountain. And they started talking to me on the radio again. And the A1E control guys, they wanted to spot us, and then we started arranging things. And they said that I was going to be last to be picked up because I couldn't answer my call sign correctly. One of the guys that's on the airplane, they got my SAR card mixed up with his. He was a master sergeant, and they was asking me his questions. Well, I knew it wasn't mine. Because one thing, I hate baseball, and they was asking me who's my favorite baseball team, and they was asking me what kind of car you have. Of course, we did the dog's name and all this stuff that goes along with that. And they said, well, you'll be last being picked up. I talked to the pilot about this later on. He said, oh, you couldn't answer the call. We was going to come and get you. I said, well, that ain't the way I felt. I said, if you guys had left me there, your last pass, I was going to end up with my 38 at you. That's what I told him. He laughed. He said, we wasn't going to leave you in the woods. But anyhow, I'm down in the woods, and the SAR actually starts, and the F4s are just going in one after the other. And what they did back then, we had a chemical that was would put you useless, let's put it that way, decapacitate you. And the F4 or the A1Es had made a run with that chemical because they were headed towards me to knock out the North Vietnamese soldiers. And what it did is, once you got hit with that chemical, is you lost all control of your body. You turned into one great big mess, and you normally passed out. Well, that's what they did there. And the helicopters, that was about 30 minutes or 40 minutes before they put the helicopters in. And they arranged to have red flares. We had to pop a red flare, hold it up, shake it. And then when they said move out into a clearing, and the helicopter would come in and pick you up. Well, they picked up the first survivor, and he was the one with a broken leg. and they put him in a hospital. In the hospital, in the helicopter, and tied him down. And then they picked up the FOCO, fire control officer, and they put him in the hospital. The helicopter, I get it right now. Put him in the helicopter, and then they said, okay, you're next. They told us when they told me to pop my red flare, and I popped my flare, and I held it up, I was waving and everything, and I was still back in the bushes a little bit, but the wind was carrying all that out in the open. And they said, we got you. They said, we got you. They said, move out into the open so we can pick you up. Well, they might have been maybe a kind of a half open area, maybe.
Bill, we're going to have to summarize. We got a bus waiting outside. We're going to have to summarize. We got a bus.
Yeah, well, I'm wrapping up right here. They said be vigilant, be quick, get out there, get on the penetrator, and get up. Well, I did. I got out there as fast as I could, grounded penetrator, crawled on the penetrator, and on the way up, there was one tree in that whole area, and it was right there. Well, the penetrator started swinging back and forth, and the helicopter moved just a little bit, and I got caught in that tree. It was everything else wasn't going on, But he let me down, he pulled over and pulled me up. And I sat in the helicopter. When they got me in, I was in the helicopter, and they made it left, and I turned around, I got a good look back at the valley. And I have never seen so much smoke and things burning in my life. It was down there. I don't know what those F4s done, but where they was dropping the ordnance, but it was a mess. But they dropped us off at Da Nang, and went back to Uban and started flying again in 14 days. And I volunteered for the next 12 months, so I wouldn't have to send another idiot over there.
All right. Thanks, Master Patterson. That's a hard act to follow. That's a good story, and that's why we took a little extra time. But we do have to summarize now because we've got a bus waiting outside to take us to the AC-130J. But first, before we conclude, by the way, there's going to be plenty of time to ask questions afterwards because we're all going to recollect back in the squadron building, 4th SOS. But I've got presentos here for all of our VIPs, 40 millimeter challenge coins. Most definitely. You're welcome. All right. He's already pulled a coin challenge. Look at him. All right. So we're going to go ahead and conclude for now. The VIPs have a bus out there waiting, and for, I guess, the crew is ready, the static deployment's ready. They'll take you directly to the aircraft. You can leave your vehicles here. Because they'll bring you back here, and then you can join us down the squadron. So thank you all very much for the first Gunship Gray. This concludes our function. Thank you.